Dos, uno, live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World, where I am joined by Rob Lubo from BookCopy. Rob, hello there.
Hey, Kane. Good to be
How are
here.
you doing? Yeah, thank you. Nice
Excellent.
to be here. You're doing well. In LA, yes?
Yes, we're all located in LA for the most part, and
Nice.
it's beautiful as ever.
Nice,
Great
hotter,
scene here.
much hotter weather than it is here, I would imagine.
Probably, yeah. It's been pretty hot this week.
Nice, nice. Well, thank you for joining us. We're going to get into an excellent conversation. We've got all sorts to talk about today. I'm really keen to learn more about book copy. Definitely keen to understand a bit more about your philosophy and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And also some pretty deep topics, I would say, around things like cognitive bias and really this technology that we all love so dearly. Where is it going, and what are some of the potential negative impacts that this stuff might have on the economy, society, and all that kind of stuff? So definitely keen to get into that conversation. But before we do that, a quick shout out to Core AI for presenting VUX World at Voice 22, which is the conference in Arlington, big Voice AI conference in Arlington, Virginia, in October. And on October the 11th, VUX World has its own stage, its own room, and essentially we're putting on a sub event at the main event. The whole day is going to be spent discussing contact center automation and walking you through the end-to-end journey of how to automate your contact center using conversational AI technologies. It's presented by Core AI. We've got a whole bunch of epic speakers showing up and sharing case studies with enterprise clients, showing you how they've done, what results they've been getting, and how you can do the same. So do not miss that. All of the links to find out more are going to be in the show notes. And coming up over the next few weeks, there's going to be a 20% discount on tickets for VUX World listeners and fans and friends of the show. So please do check that out. It's our first live event, so I'm super looking forward to that. So do check that out. I'll put the links in the show notes. And I don't know, it's a bit of a flight for you, like Rob. I don't know if you're planning on attending the Voice conference in Arlington.
I would love to. It's a bit of a flight for you too. Maybe I'll have to make the trek because you're going to be there in person, right? So you're going to be flying over the Atlantic to do this. Um,
Yes,
it sounds like a great event.
that's
I
right.
love that area. I'd love to visit, Washington, D.C. and walk around, look at the monuments too. Is that
Yeah.
nearby?
Yeah, it's supposed Washington is one of them places where it's like a classic American city. I would say it's like one. If you were going to go to America and do like five cities, Washington would probably be one of the ones that you just have to do, just because of the history and what it is, you know.
Absolutely. So
Or would you
you're
disagree with that?
no, I would definitely agree with that. And if you have to fly from the UK to the US, you could do worse than Washington D.C. because you're going to see a lot of history, a lot of monuments, a lot of bucket list items. Have you been to the States? Been to that
Nice.
area before?
Not to that area. I've been to the States once, which was for
Okay.
another voice conference, which was in Chattanooga, of all
Mm,
places. Yeah.
right. Well, no, it's nice. I've been to Chattanooga many
Yeah.
times. They have a hotel there that's like a train, um, which I've stayed in
Yeah.
like 20 times. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, DC's great. Want to see you. Want to shake your hand. Sounds like an amazing event. I've been following Core AI, great company. So plenty of reasons to go. Hope I can
Yeah.
make it.
Nice one, nice one. And another great company, Bot Copy, doing some
Uh,
very interesting stuff. Where did it come from? Well, first of all, actually, let's explain what Bot Copy is and what Bot Copy does. Firstly, that might be helpful.
mhm. We're a software company based in LA. Um, we're a SaaS model, and we like to think we're the number one web messenger for Google Cloud Dialogflow. So it's pretty niche. Our target is, I mean, our market is enterprise, public sector, because Dialogflow
Hmm.
isn't really an entry level product. And so that's what we do. We're a SaaS that really focuses on that one piece, but we've been growing recently to encompass other pieces. But modularized approach is sort of like how I would categorize us as opposed to like a Core AI, which is like a one stop. We really believe
Hmm.
in letting we're serving people who want to own their own cloud and in a big cloud back end and then kind of put modular components on the front. That's the market we serve, and for various reasons, and we can get into that.
Interesting. So how would you define a web messenger?
Well,
for Google
so
Dialogflow,
I'm using it in terms of like something that lives on your web. It could live on any channel, but it's a chat bot primarily, not a voice bot. And what we do is make it easy to put a messenger on a website. So as opposed to like a chat messenger that could be on an app or messaging app, it's specifically web. So adding a Dialogflow agent to your website in a rich custom interface was a bit of a challenge a few years ago, and there was some demand primarily from ourselves. We needed to do that quickly for some clients, and there were no SaaS products available to help us do that. So that's sort of why we created it. We always kind of say the word web when we talk about bot copy. It's web chat versus just chat.
Right. I'm with you. And so for those who've used Dialogflow, they'll be familiar with certainly Dialogflow ES, very code heavy, and Dialogflow CX, although it's a little bit more, there's a bit more of a visual component to it, there's still, a bit of pushing and pulling required to deploy chatbots and things like that. Is the idea of bot copy to minimize that kind of coding and stuff like that, so it's a little bit more of a drag and drop kind of front end to Dialogflow? Is that a good way of describing it or not?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're building the back end in Dialogflow, that's a whole job in itself. And then at some point, you're going to want to take that agent, that code base, and express it as a front end UI, as a chatbot on a website. And that could either take a year of coding and constantly maintaining and building in all sorts of custom features on the front end that can do certain things. It's a huge burden. It's the front end piece of the puzzle. And what people were doing, they were trying to build custom using React or something like that. And often their solution was janky, and it took a long time, cost a lot of money. So when we first looked into building one custom for our clients, we were looking at $30,000-$40,000 just to get that front end piece done with Dialogflow. And that seemed absurd to us, and it seemed absurd to our clients, frankly, when we were an agency. And we felt, hey, this needs to be done easier, quicker, and it can be. So that's the point. But at the same time, it needs to be HIPAA compliant. It needs to be GDPR compliant, ADA compliant, extremely secure. So it's not a lightweight piece of software. It's actually where all the business it's a portal where all the business runs through. It has to be, very high quality. So, but still being easy to use.
Yeah. And why the choice to kind of go with Dialogflow? Was it because that was what you were working with at the time, or is it because you were seeing that the adoption of Dialogflow was either more prevalent or growing? Like, I wonder if you can explain or talk us through what the decision to go kind of so all in with Dialogflow.
Sure. And it wasn't, it really was, it came out of necessity. It wasn't like we just said we're starting with the premise of Dialogflow and proceeding from there. We began as an agency about 8 years ago. And we started our software about 5 years ago. So in that 3-year period, we were trying to make good bots available to enterprise companies. And to do that, we had to look around to find products that solved our problem. So we started on tools like Chatfuel. Some of you might remember like Chatfuel and for Facebook Messenger, things like that. And as we got into bigger accounts, they wanted the bot to do more things. They said, can it do X? Can it do Y? So we'd have to look around furiously and see, well, how do we get it to do these things? And the path led to Dialogflow. We did have a meeting with someone who knew the whole landscape, and they said, okay, here are your options. Amazon Lex, there's Lewis, Facebook had something at the time, and then there's Dialogflow. Here are the pros and cons. And we looked at each one with a fine-tooth comb, and we came up with Dialogflow as being the best solution for what our clients needed. It was the fastest throughput, and the intents and entities, the kind of user interface was a lot easier at the time, more powerful than the other ones. So we chose Dialogflow. It wasn't through any particular loyalty to Google. It was just a kind of a cold, hard realization that this was the best tool. Now, for
Mm.
us, it was. For someone else, it might certainly be another tool, but it all depends on what you're
Yeah.
trying to get done.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know if you saw the post from Qbox fairly recently, which actually reflects some research that was done. I forget who actually did the research prior to that, but it was looking at the
Hmm.
most commonly used chatbot platforms in enterprise. And
Hmm.
the historic version I've seen of this is that IBM was the market leader, followed
Hmm.
by Google, followed by Microsoft, and that was pretty much it. There's like a big other category in this one, and this is not necessarily reflective of the entire market. This is just Qbox customers that use Qbox to manage their NLU. Which platforms are
Right.
they using? And still had IBM marginally as the most commonly used platform, followed by
Right.
Google Dialogflow, obviously. But Google Dialogflow,
Mhm.
from memory, was taken up more than it was prior. Again, this is two different studies, so we might be comparing apples to oranges here. Um,
Right. Right.
but then there was new entrants in there, like Cognigy and Rasa were both included as well, which is interesting.
Sure.
But
Sure.
although you've chose it for a reason, that's not necessarily about market growth and future potential by the sounds of things. It was more around Dialogflow being very practical for what you needed it to do at the time. It does actually transpire that Dialogflow is becoming a kind of like default or go-to framework and
Uh-huh.
platform for not just chat but for all kinds of stuff. So you kind of, yeah, it's not an unwise choice, is it?
No, and we did look at Watson and we did look at Rasa, and we like Rasa, and we these are all great products, and they all could be appropriate depending on what you want. And it was just, again, like you said, necessity and just the logical choice for what we wanted to do. There were a lot of requests to keep the conversations more fluid, to keep context, to be able to take a nonlinear path. Um, and as our tech team started to build within Dialogflow, we were able to kind of internalize how it worked quicker than some of the other ones. At the time, again, things might have changed since then, but at the time, that was the one. So once we started with that and we had momentum with that, it's hard to change. So we did Dialogflow for a few years. We became experts at it, and we did build some pretty cool bots. But we do plan on creating integrations with some of the other major cloud platforms later this year. So
Hmm,
probably we're looking at Azure, and we're looking at Lex 2.
nice.
We want to make sure that people who are comfortable in these cloud environments and are loyal to those brands have a way to put really intelligent agents onto their website, in the way that Google Dialogflow users can, because that's what we
Hmm,
believe. We really actually believe that it makes the world better when you have really smart bots on websites. So
yeah,
that's what we're trying to do.
definitely.
We don't want people to feel
Well,
locked into any specific vendor, you know, which
yeah,
is a big part of our
yeah,
story.
of course,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's yeah. I think that yeah, done right, they can be incredibly helpful. That's why we're all kind of getting out of bed in the morning, I suppose, isn't it? Uh,
Partly,
but
yeah.
it's yeah. I wonder whether you can kind of walk. You mentioned modules and a modular approach earlier on. I wonder whether you could kind of
Right.
walk us through what these component parts of bot copy are.
Hmm. Okay. Well, the front end UI. So you go to a website, you see the chat window pop up. That chat window should look, appropriate within that setting of your brand. So the colors, the styles, etc. So all that's taken care of with bot copy. There's no coding of the front end. You can simply select from like a WYSIWYG editor exactly how you want that little widget to look. So right then and there,
Right.
you didn't have that for something like Dialogflow. You had to build it from scratch, when we launched. Um, so that's just the first thing that most people can get their head around. The second thing is,
Yeah.
the chat window can actually read the room, so it can see ref parameters in the URL, so it can kind of know who's looking at this web page. If that ref parameter in the URL is attached to a specific user, the bot passes that through Dialogflow and can see in your database who that user is and welcome them by name, and with relevant content and all that. So there's a lot of front end
Nice.
features that can read everything going on in the website, what your language settings are, And again, I don't want this to be like a too much, a product bullet list here, but that's the layer we're talking about. Um,
Mm.
mainly the front end, mainly the front end. But then there's also we have a live chat suite as well. So, you know, you're taking Dialogflow as your backend cloud. You might be using things like Google SQL or Looker or some other products that can really kind of extend your operations on the back end. And then you're bringing in another piece, which is the bot copy, which is that whole front end part. So that's the module we're talking about. Um, and I think that's a new trend that some companies feel gives them more flexibility to scale and to mix and match as
Mm.
needed.
Yeah, I have come across that very specific need a number of years ago. Not with a client, but
Uh-huh.
someone actually reached out to me and said, "We really need to do this." And I didn't. This was probably about 2 years ago. I don't know whether that
Hmm.
was something that you were doing 2 years ago or not. But if
Oh
it
yeah,
was,
we've
then
been around.
you
They
mean
they
sorry, go on.
probably might have Googled, they probably did a search for Dialogflow web chat, and we came up number one organic because this is something that we really focused on, laser focused on this one
Yeah,
problem, and so we kind of own this little niche. And thankfully, in the past year, more people are typing that in because that's a problem more people need to solve, which is sort of what we
mm,
anticipated would happen, and we're glad it is because we're here to
yeah,
solve it.
absolutely. Definitely. And that concept of taking parameters from the web page as well and passing that through to the bot is something that I think that few teams are doing at the moment. But what it ends up doing
Hmm.
is, I mentioned this before, which is that most most chatbots start at the same place, which is, "Hi, how can
Hmm.
I help you?" And then
Right.
they require the user to then express what it is that they need. But there's already a load of information that you have. That you've got the web page that the user is on. You've got previous
Right.
pages that the user has been on. You've already mentioned there, are they
Right.
logged in or are they not logged in? If they are logged in, you know
Right.
previous purchase history. You know when they bought something. Was it 2 days ago and they're back on the website now? Or they're on a cancellations page? So what do you think they need now? So where the industry is, I find, from observation, is
Uh-huh.
just we're all at this point where it's, "Hi, how can I help you?" Whereas really what we should be trying to get to is, how can we preempt what the customer needs, or at least make an assumption based on information
Right.
that we know or can get to, which it sounds like that's kind of where you're allowing people to get to, is it?
For sure, because it's more efficient and also it's good manners. I mean, we can see what they're clicking on. We can see what they're looking at. It looks like you're interested. If you go visit your hardware store, like in the US, it's like Lowe's or Home Depot, and you're looking very intently at ceiling fans, the salesperson might come up and say, "Oh, you want a ceiling fan?" They're not going to say, "Oh, have you seen our lamps?" It's just out of nowhere, or "How can I help you today?" Also, they're going to size you up and see like how they should approach you. So this is just basic manners, and it's doable, and there's really no excuse for not trying it and seeing if it works because it's so doable. So sometimes it feels like
Mm,
companies just don't do that uh, just from inertia. But we get excited about
mm,
thinking about all the things you rattled off, like where they're coming from, if they're logged in or not, what they bought in the past, and then weaving that into the intent that first pops up. We feel our hypothesis is that that's going to be really powerful. Um, Now, in terms of showing that it has been actually powerful and actually works, we're starting to collect those use cases finally. After years of it
mm,
being hypothetical, we're now seeing actual results and benefits from doing that. I know you wrote
mm,
something really cool. I think it was this week about saying that the chatbot is going to do this or is going to do that. But
mm.
when are you going to publish something saying it did do this or it did do that? And I thought that was a great point. Um, and so I think after this, I might publish something about some really cool results that have come in. I mean, we've seen escalations plummet with just having three intents. And like big
Wow.
companies that have millions of users a day come in, and if you get 14 or 20 or 50% escalations plummet, that could be millions of dollars a year, and we're seeing it finally. So it it
Mm,
it logically makes sense, but you never know until it actually happens. And so
Yeah.
it's an exciting time. I think this is a pivotal year.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How much of these capabilities do you need to kind of actively sell, so to speak? Not sell as in you're selling the product, but selling the strategy and the approach. So
Hmm.
because I think that I mean, you could sit around and wait for the market to get there, wait for teams to realize that actually what we're doing here is pretty dumb, and there's a load of data that we could have access to, and we could be really more
Hmm.
effective. But you might be waiting a long
Right.
time, or you can go out there and try and educate and try and raise awareness about how better things can be. I'm just wondering whether either in the clients that you have, your go to market that you have, how much are you finding that you need to educate the market versus the market coming to you saying, we already have this need, kind of thing? Does that make sense?
Well, we're a pretty small company, so we don't have an enormous reach in terms of content visibility. So we try to educate people as much as we can, but in the end of the day, we need people to find us. This is the nature of our niche. Um, in the early days, we would kind of go pound the pavement and approach decision makers, and we'd often hear, "Sounds like you guys have a solution in search of a problem. We don't need this." And we heard that enough times to realize that, like, if they don't discover this on their own, if they're not like pushed towards us because they're experiencing some pain point or some urgency, it's hard to kind of come in cold and explain to people why this is good. Um,
Mm.
it can be done, but it just doesn't. It seems like most of our growth is just the light bulb going on. Some IT person was just, their C-level, leadership said, I've been reading about AI and Forrester, and we better do that. I want to see some results. Go figure out how to do it in a smart way. And then this person's kind of looking around, figuring out, oh no, what do we do? And some of those people wind up at the doorstep of Dialogflow. They're like, okay, we found a cool thing. It's Dialogflow. They sell that to leadership. And then as they start getting deeper into it, they're like, oh no, how are we going to get this on our website? There's no real good way to do that. And then they start Googling that, and then they find us. And those people sign up, they swipe. They're not even afraid to, mostly not afraid to swipe. These are often decision make, IT people from enterprise who are looking to get this done quickly. Um, and at that point, we're very happy to receive them, and they already know the drill. What they
Mm,
might not
interesting.
know at that point is like how big this actually could be, because they might not know that, hey, you can create a live chat where if the bot doesn't understand the query, it goes to live chat, but then that query gets fed back into the knowledge base so that you never have to escalate that kind of query again. And that's how you can slowly close that gap and have fewer and fewer escalations. A lot of people don't really understand that concept until you present it to them. They just
Mm,
know that they want to automate the top three requests. That's what they know, but they don't know
yeah.
just how good it can be. So
Yeah, that's very interesting. I suppose people don't know what they don't know when they first start out, do they? It's a lot like, I think what people have started to get wise to now, which is good, is that you can't just fire and forget this stuff. You when you deploy it, it's not like that's the finished article, like a website. You just click go and it's live and that's it. Your job's done. It's like as soon as you go live with a chatbot, you have to analyze it. You have to improve it over time, because if not, you might have even got the whole thing wrong in the first place. You're building it often on assumptions if you don't do any kind of testing, or you're not basing it based on actual data and stuff like that. So I suppose sometimes people don't know what they don't know, but the good thing, I suppose, from what I'm hearing, is that you found a niche that is a real need that people will get to, definitely, if they're building chatbots and if they're even halfway on their journey towards maturity. And so it's a very interesting niche to take up, and I think that it's
I think you
yeah,
froze.
a very well needed
Oh,
situation.
mm.
It's allowed to be break up.
Your
Did we
video
break up
froze
there?
there for a second, so I might have missed a piece of that because your video froze for a second.
Oh,
But
apologies.
um, it is
No, I was just saying. I was
yeah.
just
What
saying
was the
that. I was
last thing?
just saying. I was just saying essentially that I think there's a bit of a delay on the line here. So apologies if I'm cutting you off. I don't mean to. I was just saying that the you found a niche a very specific niche that is yet unserved that people will get to when they are on their journey towards maturity. Essentially, is what I was trying to say.
Some people
That
will
makes
take that path, sure. Other paths do lead to Rasa. Other paths do lead to Core AI. That's totally legitimate. It just depends on, your specific team, your specific vision for what you want. And some paths lead to Dialogflow, and rightly so. And so that's the market we serve. It's for each company, each team to discover which product is going to meet their needs the best. So
mm, mm. Nice.
we like to think that we serve the teams that are looking for really strong NLU, a lot of, and have a vision for kind of like a robust back end where, like you were describing, the bot can really understand the context, and then as well as having that separate layer, and to be able to use a cloud, rather than a one-stop shop. So like at the very beginning, we were kind of looking at Drift and Intercom and thinking, well, they really nailed the front end. That's what we want. We want a really solid looking little chatbot that looks kind of like that, but we don't want to use the back end of Drift and
Mm.
Intercom. We want to use Dialogflow as the back end. So that was us. So if other people
Mm.
feel that way, then they'll find us. Yeah.
Interesting.
But then there's a whole other
Really.
discussion of a lot of companies don't even realize they want a chatbot on their website. Maybe they're thinking they want a WhatsApp presence, or they want a voice presence, or call center presence. Um, so those people may not wind up finding our solution, and that's okay too.
Yeah, horses for courses, so to speak. So one of the things that's interesting, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier on, which is that all of these companies are creating conversational assistants. You've got Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, Apple. For a long time, have been leading the charge as far as mass adoption of conversational user interfaces. You've got lots of
Right.
businesses that are now all creating their own assistants, whether that's a chatbot, whether that's you mentioned WhatsApp, whether that's in the call center. And, the thing that often gets said is that AI will replace jobs, and that artificial intelligence is very good at doing that repetitive mundane stuff. Computers don't sleep, they don't get tired, they don't run out of steam, they don't have bad days where they're in a bit of a mood
Mm.
and they're a bit slow to respond, or they're not very kind of helpful. And so there's all kinds of things that
Right.
computers do differently to humans. Yeah, some would say better, some would say
Hmm.
worse, depending on how you look at it. And then the thing that's always said is that AI is
Right.
going to replace jobs. And
Hmm.
there isn't a terrible amount of evidence yet, unless you can prove me wrong. I haven't seen a terrible amount of evidence of it doing this yet. I was in a discussion with Jim Rowe the other day about he had something
Hmm.
which was like a ROI model, which was said, if you have X number of calls that come in and they cost you X number of pounds to serve because a call center agent costs X number of pounds, then if you save 30% of calls
Right.
from using a chatbot, then you will save 30% of the cost and that. And it's like, from everything that I've worked on in the past, and not even just in conversational AI, but also in enterprise kind of like digital service delivery and stuff like that, it never
Right.
reaches the level of demand, or the automation never reaches the level of demand which actually forces or gives the company the option to sack people. There has no doubt been cases where that has been the case in Latin America. I think Vodafone laid off a bunch of people, and there's been cases that I know of where BPO contracts have been downsized because now they don't need quite as much capacity overseas as they did. And so there's definitely
Right.
signs of that happening. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that as far as the impact of this technology on society and the economy. I'm wondering whether you can kind of, share your views on that, because I know you've got some pretty kind of strong views on where this stuff is going as all of these companies start infusing AI everywhere. What does that do to things like jobs, things like the economy, things like that?
Right. Well, we don't know. I don't think anyone can know. I don't think any economist can know, let alone me, because I'm not not an economist. But it's a hypothesis. This stuff is possible. Just the fact that it's possible gives me pause. I believe it's possible that um, AI, conversational AI, can get good enough to replace jobs. I don't know that it's going to happen, but um, it could happen. And I also know that in a capitalist society, your whole point is to try to reduce your expenses if you can, and that's non-negotiable. Every company that's in business in the U.S. is trying to reduce their expenses any way they can, and I see that there's a way to do that. Now, whether other people are going to see there's a way to do that, whether these companies are going to see it and the light bulb's going to go off and they're going to execute it, is another question. But just the fact that it can be done means that it probably will eventually be done. I agree with you that there's not a whole lot of evidence that that's happening, but I mean, you can look at anything that's a black swan event or some kind of innovation. You can look at the Wright brothers. You could have had people saying there's no evidence that making wings is going to work. We have a lot of evidence that it results in broken bones, and that goes back thousands of years. We've seen a lot of stupid wings. What are you guys doing? You nuts? But if an engineer could actually look with a lot of precision at what these Wright brothers were up to and say, well, wait a second here. There actually is a lot of inherent evidence in the way these wings and this tail is structured that it could actually create some lift. And I bet it will. That happened. So, you have to look at the technology and you have to look at what's possible and try to make the most informed guesses possible without being restricted to this idea that, it's never happened before and we're not seeing it happen, so it's not gonna happen. The closer I look at this technology, the more obvious it is to me that it's going to happen. That's my philosophy behind it.
I think I agree, to be honest, because and it's not really even as complex as the whole kind of aeroplane flying thing, really, because the Wright brothers trying to get a plane to fly, and there's already birds flying around, so that things can fly, but making something from scratch that can fly is quite a feat, isn't it? Whereas we've already made stuff that can have a conversation quite successfully, and so it already exists. It's just a case of
do it, by the way.
Yeah,
humans can do it. We already know that birds can fly. We already know that humans can talk. So we have these organic kind of models that things are possible. So now how do we emulate them with technology?
Yeah.
And for that analogy, we don't have to have humans talking in a very complex way. We could just say, we already know that I can put a person in this chair with a headset and they can answer these 3 questions pretty adequately. That's where the bar is. You don't have to create AGI. You can just create a narrow AI that can do a few things that I can do when I have my headset on in a tech support role. So sorry to interrupt, but I think that analogy with the bird, we see a bird can do it, so maybe we can do it. I think that analogy applies. We see a human being in a tech support role doing it, so why can't we make a bot do it?
Yeah, and bots already are doing it. And so it's like, what's interesting is that some of them. But if you were to extrapolate that further out, though, you've got conversations that can be automated with bots, and getting increasingly more sophisticated as well. If you look at companies that started with a chatbot in 2016 to 2018, they often start with the low-hanging fruit, the FAQ, stuff like that. A lot of them now are moving into transactional stuff. They're moving into automated services, automated transactions, which means that it's taken away more demand. And my philosophy has always been that basically all a business is really is just a bunch of people. And all those bunch of people are doing fundamentally is either having conversations or tapping and swiping on screens. When you break it down, we're having a conversation over the phone, we're emailing, we're texting, we're talking to each other internally within the organization, and then we're pushing buttons in systems to say that loan's been approved or that loan hasn't been approved. And so it's not even the front end of conversational AI that's the real, I suppose, if you wanted to look at it, risk, I suppose, is a word you could use. Because if you compare conversational AI with some of that automation, like hooking into APIs that automate services, like RPA systems that run along and kick off processes and run workflows and all that kind of stuff, not only is it potentially affecting the conversations that are being had within businesses, but it's also affecting the tapping and swiping, which is the other half. And so if you extrapolate further on, it could potentially be that it's not only replacing or taking away call center jobs, but it could actually take away quite a lot of business administration jobs and most of the business basically.
For sure. I think it was Seth Godin who said this on an interview that any task that you can actually write down the steps that it takes to finish that task can be automated. So one would be hard pressed to come up with a task that we do that can't really be broken down, atomized into discrete steps. There might be a lot of them. There might be a lot of complexity to certain things, but they still are divisible into steps. So it could creep up that ladder towards more complex operations, like you're saying. And if doing so would reduce costs, then there would be incentive for companies to do that. The only reason they wouldn't do it is if they didn't think it would work, or they just didn't have the resources or the focus, and they were lazy. I don't really like that word lazy, but the reality is there is a lot of laggards, late adopters, conservative thinkers, people who just don't like to change. A lot of people are still doing on-prem cloud. Why? Why aren't they on AWS? Why aren't they? So you got to wonder, like, whether it's going to happen or not, but it certainly could happen. And if you do create new jobs, then okay, let's take an example of a new job that springs forth from this AI revolution. What set of tasks are required for that job, and can those tasks be exploded and then automated one by one? And there's a limit to what humans can do, right? So at some point AI catches up to that limit. It's going to be rough. There will be a few jobs left, but will there be enough for the 4 billion people who want jobs? I don't know. It's an open question.
Yeah, there's an interesting. Do you listen to the Joe Rogan podcast or not?
Once in a while, yeah. It's hard to avoid.
Yeah, it is a bit hard to avoid. Yeah. So one of the things that I've saw on there before is, in fact, a couple of times I think, is that that conversation comes up a bit here and there around AI and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that gets mentioned, I can't remember if it's Joe Rogan or the guests or whatever, which is around that, if AI was to automate all kinds of stuff, and the people who had jobs now don't have jobs, and then, fast forward, then people have more time to do things that they would rather do, more time to, I don't know, practice making clay pots or sewing or singing or playing a guitar, whatever it might be.
Always the singing in the clay pot.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like
turn back into
never like cleaning up the streets or visiting elderly people or inventing something cool. It's always like poetry and clay pots.
Yeah. It's always playing music. Yeah. Playing music and having fun.
Well, look, when you had aristocratic societies, if you look in history, what did they do when the next generation was born into wealth? They would master the harp or the piano or the harpsichord, or they would learn exotic languages. This is what they did when they had free time, and that was seen as what you do when you've reached that level. And there was no stigma against it. It was actually a sign of class and whatever. So, but I do hear people saying like, well, what's the use of doing that stuff? But it's, if it's okay for, a king's children to do that, then it should be okay for anyone to do that, I would imagine.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a weird statement.
Yeah. Well, if it's good enough for royalty, then it's good enough for us. But I suppose what then happens to the economy then as a result of that? Some people might not want to sit around making clay pots or learning the guitar or whatever it might be. Some people might want to go and earn, and we live in a capitalist society, as you mentioned, which is that everyone is kind of free if you choose to pursue capitalistic gains, so to speak. So, we're getting hypothetical here. We're not necessarily talking about what's actually happening, but like if we get into a stage in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long it takes, where AI replaces more and more jobs, not just in customer service, but across the business, what's the impact on the economy? Because no one's spending any money because no one's earning any money. So,
Well, so really, when we talk about AI, the bigger picture here is automation, production, production of resources, services, and goods, automating it. So if we can automate production to the point where there is an abundance and it's actually more costly to employ humans to create this abundance, then the production will be created through automation, right? Because it's cheaper and more efficient. So then you've got, a lot of humans over here who still need to eat, still need shelter, right? So, but they're not being employed because it's cheaper and more efficient to automate. So what happens to those people? What do they do? And that's kind of like trying to keep people on the dime to answer that question is difficult because then you often hear, well, there will be other jobs for them to do. Okay, but what if, automation reduces that number of jobs? What do the remaining people do? And so forth. You're saying they're not going to buy anything because they're not earning anything, but they do need resources. They need to eat. So, I mean, what do you do if you don't have any food, but you have a kid you need to feed and you have no money to buy food? What do you do? Like, what would you do?
Things get pretty primitive pretty quickly, don't they?
They do. So, and we don't know how this is all going to shake out, but I'm just saying, hypothetically, if it's cheaper to produce goods and services through automation, and if people actually do that, then there needs to be a discussion, a social and economic discussion, or there will be a lot of pitchforks flying, because people need to eat, and because eating isn't so simple as hunting a deer or gathering berries. That's not the world we live in. All the land is owned already. All the means of production are already owned. Someone's born in this world. Your option is you work for an owner, and you try to position yourself to become one. So you can't just go out and necessarily take your bow and arrow and hit a deer and live that way. You're going to have to buy things. So how to it's these are tough questions. I don't see it as a reason to avoid pursuing automation as quickly as possible. I think we should pursue automation as quickly as possible, but I think that we should be careful that that doesn't displace people or hurt them.
Do you think there'll be a notable tipping point, or do you think it will just be gradual? So if you think about today, now you've got, everyone's addicted to their phone, 100%, and it's causing so many mental health problems,
Right.
especially with younger people. Completely hooked on gratification, immediate gratification, the opinions of others, and this algorithm that just keeps feeding dopamine into the brain. But that's took it's not even a long time. I was going to say a long time, but it's been like a decade, hasn't it, or a decade and a half to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact of that still hasn't been felt, I don't think, properly, because there's kids being born today that will grow up with that constant dopamine addiction from the age of 4, and so the impact probably hasn't been felt. But do you think it'll be like a gradual thing, like over the course of 100 years now everyone's driving a car and they weren't before, or do you think it'll be like immediate, like all of a sudden within a 5 to 10 year time span, everything just happens and everyone's out of a job and then there's carnage?
Probably a bit of both. There's different pockets of cultures here and there. Some will fall off a cliff. Some will see a gradual change. I think you could say the same about mobile phones. In some cultures, mobile phones might have had an explosion overnight. In others, it was gradual. So hopefully it's gradual. But you hear things about exponential change of technology, and you hear about the self-driving cars hitting the highways next year and things like that. The endless pursuit for lowering your overhead is a real thing, and the number one job in 40 states in the U.S. truck driving, and I think the second one is call center workers. So as soon as these companies can do what they're doing with just a fraction of the overhead, it's rational to assume that there's a chance that they will, and that it will happen quickly. It may not, but it could.
You can't stop it, can you?
And
Humans, go on.
if they don't do that, then you have to say, well, why? Why would a trucking company spend 10x more on their expenses than their competitors do when they can use self-driving trucks in, say, 2025? I can't think of an answer why they would do that that holds any water.
Maybe.
Because that company wouldn't survive.
Well,
if their competitors are doing it.
There's
unless it's like some kind of co-op or something.
Yeah, there's different levels. So what tends to happen is that a market has obviously market leaders and followers and stuff like that, and the market tends to be made up of things that are not actually that different. So if you look at Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Fanta, I know Coke owns most of these brands, but look at just the drinks brands, for example. They're all pretty much the same. Mm-hmm. There's lots of different orange drinks, lots of different Coca-Cola drinks, and so the market gets full of very similar kind of things. Same as washing detergent and stuff like that. And as much as the brands themselves want to say that they're differentiated or different, in reality they're not really that much different. It's just that whoever gets most known gets most of the market share, basically. But then you do have companies now that are cropping up, which are, for example, like eco-friendly clothing brands that use nothing but recycled, materials and all this kind of stuff, that find a group of people that care about that, and they build a small brand off the back of that. So in the trucking example, it may be that a company values people and social values more than it does profits, and therefore it may well get custom from those who value that as well. Bit different to use that analogy for the trucking industry, because fundamentally those trucks are delivering goods to somewhere that probably don't give a shit about that kind of stuff. It's more the brands that are on the truck that matter,
I mean, so if I'm hiring a trucking company to deliver my inventory across the country, I'm not willing to pay that trucking company a lot more because they're holding on to human drivers, unless my customers are willing to pay a lot more because I'm holding on to that trucking company, which is sort of a stretch for most of the products out there. There are niches where people will do that, where you'll find, and that's great. I mean, it would be wonderful if everybody was, voted with their dollar for things that were always fair trade and, organic and sustainable. But until we make that a law, it's going to be Adam Smith's invisible hand. Wherever the profit is, that's usually where the majority will go.
And so let's say that that is happening definitely, as far as the conversational AI side of things is happening. Lots of businesses are doing it, whether they're starting small, whether they're been doing it for a long time. There is definitely automating conversations, and be that as it may, there is lots of considerations for doing it ethically. For those that are mature, for those that have been doing it for a while, or for those that are switched on, there should be considerations for how ethical it is to do this. There needs to be decisions made around, if you're using a voice assistant, whether it's a male voice or a female voice, there needs to be considerations for the business about what it means to have an AI make decisions, potentially decisions that are going to tell a customer no, that they can't have something, and it's just a computer doing it. So there's a big ethical kind of minefield, but there's also issues with the technology itself, which is that the typical study that everyone is aware of. I don't know if it'll be replicated today or not, but the typical study of ASR engines understand more accurately words spoken by white American men than they do black American females and things like that. So there's inherent bias in some of this technology as well, which I know is also something you've been thinking about as well, this whole cognitive bias element of the technology.
Well, I do think about that, but not enough. It really is important. We don't create the bots, the agents themselves anymore. We just provide the software for other people to create the agents. So it is, garbage in, garbage out. You're going to get a lot of bias, and you're also going to get a lot of bias with human agents too. It's possible a live agent is going to have an easier time understanding one demographic versus another dialect too. So, that's a constant thing. I think the potential to avoid bias in AI is higher than the potential to avoid it in your human employees in many ways. Um, but it isn't something that I know much about. I do think about cognitive bias in terms of how AI can detect cognitive bias or informal fallacies within rhetoric. That's a side interest because there are a lot of things within rhetoric that you can't something's up, but you can't really point to it. You can't point that it happened. There's something called paralipsis, where you say something without really saying it. Like, well, it would be a real shame if something were to happen to you. That's like a threat, right? If that's like somebody's saying, well, it would be a shame if something happened to you. You know that they're threatening you, but you don't. But they have plausible deniability,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you quantify that pragmatic language understanding, that tone, that implicit message behind the message? Plausible deniability is a weaponized form of rhetoric. So we're not doing a very good job, with our human brains proving it happened or things like that. But deep learning and AI could possibly say, well, look, here are the markers. Here's a way to flag pragmatic meaning and tone, that beyond a reasonable doubt of what it means. And so I do think that AI can be used to mitigate bias that way. So when I mentioned I'm on the Cognitive Bias Foundation, that's what that's about. That's about flagging bias and fallacies within rhetoric.
Right. Interesting.
It's a linguistics problem, and I think it's a really cool problem because if you ever get in a debate with someone, in a forum or with your family over the dining room table, it gets really messy really fast because there's a lot of irrelevant comments, disorganized comments, and it just becomes a big mess. And you see it between, countries fighting. You see it between spouses fighting. How do we pick that apart and see what's actually happening? I think AI could be very helpful with that.
And also potentially in a...
And so,
sorry, go on.
I'm sorry. No, that's where cognitive bias and AI kind of overlap. That's where it does for me. Yeah. I don't know much about the ethics for creating AI that isn't discriminatory or biased towards specific people in terms of like identity politics and so forth. It's crucially important that we do the best we can in that. But that's where my knowledge ends in that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. So when you're saying cognitive bias in terms of detecting, bias within rhetoric, would you see the potential application of that being something like in a court of law or something like that? Where would the application of this be, do you think?
So a court of law is actually a pretty good place to have a strong argument, a cogent argument, because there's some order involved. There's protocol. There's a judge, and you've got a jury, and you've got a process. You've got a bailiff. You don't have that in classrooms and in kitchens and town halls. You do have that in the court system because the court system is designed to create cogent arguments. They're not perfect. It's inductive logic, but it's still a process. And also with science, hopefully we have that same thing. So I don't know that the courtrooms would be the first place to put it. I think they're doing an okay job. They could be, but maybe that could increase it could add more evidence, linguistic evidence pointing to hey, this utterance typically means to a rational person this thing. There's some implicature here. There's some implications. So look beyond the words. The deep learning is telling us that this inflection usually means this, and then a jury has to decide if that's true or not. So that can be a tool in the tool belt for a court system. But what I'm thinking is that what we really need is when it comes to popular conversation, we're just awash in informal fallacies and in ad hominems and in distractions and deflections. It's just everywhere. And if there were tools that could kind of point to it, just like Grammarly, not censor it, but just flag it. Say, hey, 82% chance that this was an ad hominem. you might want to take a look at it and decide for yourself. Now at least there's some clues that we can actually kind of shed light on why our conversations are so messy. And when you think about it, messy conversations at scale could do us in as a species. So that could be a cool application for AI.
82% chance it's ad hominem what? Ad hominem.
So, yeah, that's a Harry Potter spell. You haven't heard of it?
Oh, I should have done. I'm a big Harry Potter fan.
There are fallacies. Logical fallacies often have these highfalutin Latin names, which I love to use in conversation to demoralize my opponents. No, ad hominem. Ad hominem is just like, listen, I'm no longer attacking your argument or the case you're making. I'm now attacking you. So, like, if my grandmother said smoking is bad for your health, and then I say, but you're smoking. So who are you to say that? Therefore, smoking is not bad for your health. So what I did there was I attacked my grandmother instead of her argument. Let's say she's pointing to some research that cigarettes are bad for you. And I'm saying, but you smoke. That's called a tu quoque, I think, to use the Latin. And these things are rampant. So anytime you talk about any subject, you're going to get distraction techniques like, well, if everybody thinks so, it must be true. That's called ad populum. And so I don't know why I know these things, probably just from a lifetime of arguing with people and getting frustrated. It's hard to kind of explain what they just did, what kind of nonsense they just pulled, if you don't have a word for it. Because you get tired explaining the word in a paragraph. You say, you just did a tu quoque. You just did a post hoc ergo propter hoc. You just did a ad populum fallacy. So philosophers develop this so that they can get something done. They can actually have a conversation without it getting derailed. We need to bring that into the public square a little bit more so that we can be a little more clear with what we're saying and find some common ground. I think AI can help with that.
I like it. I definitely need to brush up on my Latin and philosophy. That's really good. And a part of that
don't use those words. Don't use those words in friendly conversation because they sound pompous. But let's let the robots do that. Then we don't.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. Yeah, that's a good one. Cool. That's really good. So, final question. The LinkedIn newsletter that we did this week was introducing a new guy called Bullshit Man, which you obviously read because you were talking about one of the articles in there, which was moaning about how people say "to" in these headlines. X company to revolutionize speech recognition technology, which just means that they've signed a deal, they're going to do some work, but nothing's been done yet. There's been no results. So what I'm going to do from now on is, in these newsletters, is have a little section for Bullshit Man, which is going to draw out some of the bullshit that's around in the industry, because I think there's a lot of it. There's a lot of overhype. There's a lot of snake oil sales kind of stuff going on. And there's just a lot of rubbish that I think clouds the market, doesn't make it helpful for people. For people that need this technology, that want to use it and get something done, makes it far more difficult. And the market, I think it's probably just because it's saturated and everyone's trying to vie for attention. But what ends up happening is that everything gets clouded and muddled and it's just bullshit. And so my last question for you, Rob, is what is some of the bullshit that you have been identifying lately? Is there any pet peeve within this industry where people are just either getting the complete wrong end of the stick on things, or they're stating assumptions as if they're fact, or any kind of general bullshit that you've observed going on that you think would be useful to call out? Don't have to name any names, but just general themes.
Gosh, I don't like to do. I mean, I'm actually, my history is in marketing, so anyone who's trying to make a living and sell a product you're gonna eventually step into some bullshit, because you're gonna make some superlative claims about what you're offering, and that's just the way it is. I do it, everybody does it, but at the same time, I think nobody really there's a lot of different markets out there. They need different things. All the solutions that are coming out, they're making claims that might be true, or that could be true, or that should be true. And I think there's enough room for everybody to experiment and to try to pitch their vision of what could happen with these products. So I can't really think of anyone who I would call bullshit on in the industry. I think it's a young industry. people are trying their hardest to make something work and to make, I want to mention, because you got me talking about, things that were political, economical, and futuristic, and then linguistics. I want to mention that, like, my partner, the co-founders, Dustin Dye and Alex Seegers, and myself, we really believe that these products and our product will make things better for not just businesses, but for people. You've got people, approaching the public sector who are, waiting in lines and get stuck in red tape. You've got people, enterprise, people who are trying to find out how to do their job better, and they need to call the help desk, centralized help desk, to see how they, what the company's protocol is. There's a lot of hassles out there. So we're really trying to make things better. Are we going to do it? Are we going to succeed? Who knows? Are we going to paint a picture of this sort of like amazing best case scenario? Absolutely we are. I don't think that's bullshit. I think that's just needed. I think we've got to say, hey, here's what could happen. Let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's believe it. Let's have faith. There's a lot of faith in the AI industry, in the chatbot industry. There always has been. And sometimes it's blind faith. Sometimes it's naive faith. But I'm all for it. I think that you don't want to lie, but you do want to paint glorious visions of what could really happen with your technology. So I'd rather focus on that part. Like, it's not bullshit. It's more like zealousness, zeal is what I'm seeing. And we like that. We like, want people to dream big.
Good. Absolutely. So. And Bullshit Man is purely a marketing ploy on my side as well. So I'm just as bad as everybody else, to be honest. But definitely, I think there's a different.
No, by the way, I love Bullshit Man. I think the graphic was hilarious and the writing was fantastic. So keep doing that. I'm not going to call bullshit on anyone for a lot of reasons. I just gave you one. There are others. If I call bullshit on people, I might make enemies, and I don't want to do that. But I definitely want you to do it. Okay, so keep doing it and keep spitting the truth.
I'm not calling bullshit on any individuals. I'm calling bullshit on concepts, philosophies, and assumptions that many hold that I think are not grounded in anything. And so that's where I'm trying to get to, as I'm trying to get to the truth of what works in this industry, what doesn't work in this industry, what's being overly hyped and overly sold based on either false assumptions or maybe accurate assumptions, but still assumption that's unproven, and just trying to solidify what the truth is and what the reality is versus what's pretend and what's not. And so that's kind of the philosophy. Yeah.
It's helpful and it's needed. And I appreciate that you're doing it. When you wrote those examples of blog headlines, I've written headlines like that. So my immediate impulse is he's talking about me a little bit, So you, even though you're not naming people by name, you're challenging people to question what they're doing and do it better, which is really needed. So
cool.
My next headline won't be, we hope it'll do this, or we think it's going to do this. It'll be, it's doing it.
Yeah.
Or if not, I'll be more clear about the fact that this is a hypothesis. We really believe it could happen.
We aim to.
Try it.
There's nothing wrong with having an aim and a goal. We aim to do this. It's just when someone says that it's going to happen, it's almost like a foregone conclusion. This technology is going to deliver these results for this company in this time period. It's like, well, there's a lot more to it than that. It should, and hopefully it does. But it's almost like reporting on the event before the event has happened, which is, I don't know. I can't really get away with it.
Right. So you take that headline and you run it through the cognitive bias detector, and it says, you're bullshitting me because you don't really know that's going to happen. Right. So that's kind of what you're doing. Until we build that machine, we need bullshit, man.
That's it. Classic. Well, Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I will stick all of the links to BotCopy into the show notes, so everybody can go either to the website or into the show notes in your podcast player to do that and visit it out and check it out. I definitely think it's a fantastic product. Definitely a niche that is well needed. I've had requests from people who have been asking for something similar in the past, and now I know that it's BotCopy that they need. So there we go. Appreciate your time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a
Cheers.
pleasure. Cheers.